Welcome to the latest in the Esperanto 101 series. We're going to talk about the complex verb forms. Now this video, possibly more than any other, is going to be one where you're going to want to pause and rewind and go back and re-listen to things a lot, because I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but there's a lot of stuff to process here. But at least, again, Esperanto is very regular. And I've come up with a way to explain it that I think will help. So we've met the three simplest verb tenses in Esperanto. I'm skipping the conditional and the imperative here. Just simply present, past, and future. He sees her, he saw her, he will see her. What if we have some more nuanced constructions, though? What if we're trying to be more fine-grained about when things are happening and when they were done and so forth? Here's a series of sentences I'm going to process later in this video, and we're going to translate these into Esperanto, and we're going to give them as much nuance as we can. You know, she had been going to see him yesterday, not simply she saw him yesterday. I was going to the store, not simply I went, but I was going. There was a process involved. By tomorrow, she will have already won. She may win late tonight, but by tomorrow, she will have won. Surely he would have called if everything was fine. He was loved by everyone. He's not even the one doing the loving. He was loved by everyone. And well, if I'd been there at the time, I would have been shot. You know, that sounds terrible. So let's look into this. In addition to the verb forms you've already met, Esperanto allows you to form participles. Now, participles in English are things like, you know, the running man. Running is a participle adjective formed from the verb to run. It describes somebody who is in the action of running. The loved man, the man who is loved, right? Loved can be a participle adjective describing the state of being loved, right? So these are participles. They're adjectives that you form from a verb to describe somebody who is doing the action or receiving the action. Esperanto also has both active and passive participles, but it has them for all three different times, and they're formed very regularly. The active participles of verbs are formed using the suffixes ant, int, and ont. And the vowel in those is the same as the one in the verb's ending for that time if it were a normal verb. So vidas is sees, vidanto is someone who sees, vidinto is someone who saw, vidonto is someone who will see. And unlike in English where the participles are basically used as adjectives, in Esperanto the participles can take the ending o, and thus they become sort of participle nouns. And indeed the name of the language itself is one of those, Esperanto. You know, esperi is to hope, so Esperanto, one who is hoping. Here's a couple of other words that are formed from participles. Amanto, lover. Literally, it's simply one who loves, but it's used to describe a lover. Edzigonto. If you remember edzo, which is husband, and the eg suffix, which turns something into a verb of becoming, edzigi is to become a husband, so edzigonto is someone who is going to become a husband. In other words, a fiancé. And vidinto is someone who saw, as I said before, and so that word can be used for witness. The passive participles are formed very similarly. They only differ by one letter. They're missing the N. So at, it, ot for present, past, and future. Amato, that's one who is loved, the beloved. There's the lover versus the beloved, right? So amato is the beloved, amanto is the lover. Frostigita, deserto. Frostigi is to freeze, and so frostigita is something that was frozen. The dessert didn't do the freezing, it's the thing that was frozen, and it's in the past, so it's gita instead of gata. It may still be frozen, so frostigata is probably not wrong, but it was frozen already, so frostigita deserto. And I came up with this one. Executi is to execute someone. So someone who is going to be executed is a dead man walking, right? And so that's executoto. Executoto. One who will be executed. So you see how you can create some interesting words using the participles. Now, the passive mood of a verb. This is when you're using the verb, but the subject is the recipient of the verb rather than the doer of the verb. If instead of saying, I love, you want to say, I am loved, you would say, mi estis amata. I am loved. You take the passive participle and you say, that's what I am. I am loved. Mi estas amato. If you want to say I am loved, you say mi estas amata. You take the past participle of the verb, present. You take the passive participle of the verb, amata, and you use esti with it, because amata is now just an adjective like any other. It means loved. So I am loved, like you would say I am young, I am happy, I am bored, or whatever. I am loved. Mi estas amata. Li estas pafita. He's been shot. Pafi is to shoot, and so pafita means was shot. It's an adjective that describes something that was shot. Pafita means past shot, right? If it's being shot right now, it's pafata. But it was shot, so pafita. So he has been shot. He's currently in the state of having already been shot. Li estas pafita. That leads us into a discussion of complex tenses. You can form all these complex tenses with participles. And here's how you do it. Step one is to pick the form of st, which covers when the state being described occurs. So think about how your complex tense begins in English. If you were to say, she is loved, or she is going to something, or she is something, well, that's present. Is present. Or if you say, she has been here, she has gone to church, she has been going to go, has is also present. So we use the present form of esti, estas. If your sentence begins, she was or she had, well, those are past. So that's estis, estis. If it's she will be or she will have or she is going to, well, that's future. So that's estos. And if it was she would, she would be there, but she's not, that's conditional. So it's estus. So we pick one of these four forms of esti. Okay? Step two is to think about how you describe the state of the real action that's going on. If you say, she is seeing him, well, that's present. The action of seeing is present. So that's vidanta. It's the present participle. If you said, she has seen him, well, seen is the past. So that's vidinta. And if you say, well, she is going to see him, going to see would be future participle. So that's vidonta. So you just pick a form of esti and figure out which participle to use, and you put them together. So now let's go through all those sentences I showed you at the beginning of the video. She had been going to see him yesterday. So this is describing a past state in which the seeing was still in the future, right? So yesterday she was going to see him. So at some point yesterday, seeing him was still in the future. So let's follow the formula I gave you. Had is past. She had been going. That's past. So that's estis. Going to see is future. So that's vidonta. So she estis vidonta. She had been going to see. She estis vidonta lin hieraŭ. Him yesterday. She had been going to see him yesterday. She estis vidonta lin hieraŭ. I was going to the store. So this is a past time when the act of going to the store was actually in progress. In other words, in the past, the going was the present, if that makes sense. Was is past, so that's estis again. Going is in the present tense though, right? At the time I'm telling you about, I was actually in the middle of going, so it was present then. So I want to say mi estis iranta alla butiko. Estis iranta, was going. By tomorrow, she will have already won. So we're saying in the future, her victory will already be in the past. So we're describing the future when her victory is already over. So by tomorrow, she will have, so that's future, estos. But she will have already won. That's past, right? Her winning is in the past at the time we're talking about. So that's venkinta. Venki is to win. Venkinta is the past. So by tomorrow, she will have already won. Morgau, tomorrow. Morgau, she estos venkinta jam. Jam is already. Morgau, she estos venkinta jam. She will have won. So that's what we call a future perfect tense in English. But surely he would have called if everything was fine. Well, so that's a conditional thing. You know, he didn't call, but he would have called. That's the conditional tense. So it's estus. If everything was fine. So, you know, have called is the tricky bit. You know, well, that would have been in the past. We say, surely he would have called. You know, at this point, he would have already called. The calling would have happened. And it wouldn't be happening now. It would have already happened. He would have called in the past. So that would be telefoninta, because it's the past. So estus telefoninta, would have called. Sed certe, but surely, li estus telefoninta, he would have called, if everything was fine. Se cio estus bona, if everything were or would be. Since the one half of the sentence is conditional, we can say the other half is also conditional. We don't think everything's fine. We think something must be wrong. So when we say, if everything was fine in the conditional tense. So, sed certe li estus telefoninta is the complex verb. And the remaining two sentences that I said at the beginning have passive forms. They are sentences where the subject receives the action of the verb instead of doing it themselves. He was loved by everyone. Okay, so in the past, everyone was loving him at that time. They still may be loving him today, but at some point in the past, he was then currently being loved. So, he was loved, past, estis, but the loving was present at the time we're looking back at. So, amata. And notice it's amata because it's passive. He's receiving the love rather than giving it, which would make it amanta. So, li estis amata. Now, when in English we say we give a passive verb and we say, he was hit by a ball, he was loved by everyone, he was visited by the president, or whatever. We use the preposition by to say who actually was doing the action. In Esperanto, we use the preposition de for this purpose. In English you might hear, he was beloved of everyone. It's that in Esperanto, it's de. So, li estis amata, he was being loved at that time, de ĉiuj. Li estis amata de ĉiuj. If I had been there at the time, I would have been shot. Okay, there's two verbs here, so we're going to break them each down on 2 slides. The first verb is a conditional state in which we say if you had been at a particular place at a particular time and it was in the past. And the second clause, I would have been shot, is a conditional state of you've just been shot. So, for the first verb, the basic form is conditional. If I had been there, but I wasn't there, but if I had been, so that means we must use the conditional, estus. The time to be there is past, and here notice we're using the participle of esti itself. If I had been, not had been swimming or not had been seeing, but if I had simply been there. So the verb that we have to form a participle of is the verb to be. So it's a participle of esti. It's the past participle of esti, which is estinta. So if I had been there at the time, if in the past I was there, estus estinta. And then, of course, there is tie, which you remember from the correlatives. And then at that time, je tiam. At the time, je tiam. So the first clause, if I had been there at the time, is se mi estus estinta ti je tiam. The complex verb is estus estinta. Very interesting verb. Now the second verb, the second clause, I would have been shot. Would have, again, I wasn't shot, but I would have been, so that's conditional. Estus again. Now, in the hypothetical timeline where I was shot, the shot just happened right before the moment we're talking about. I've been shot. So I was just shot a moment ago. So if I'm the one shot, and it happened just before the moment I'm talking about, so it's passive participle, because I'm the one shot, not the one doing the shooting, and it's past. So it's pafita. So estus pafita, would have been shot. So our complete sentence is, se mi estus estinta tie je tiam, mi estus pafita. Now, isn't there a simpler way to express some of these things? Certainly, but you lose some of the nuances. So let's look at these 6 sentences in more detail and see what would happen. Let's say I want to use simpler tenses to say she had been going to see him yesterday. Well, I could just say, she vidis lin hieraŭ. She saw him yesterday. Well, but she had been going to see him. But you could imagine a sentence in English where it was like, she had been going to see him yesterday, but the car broke down. Well, in that case, she didn't actually see him yesterday, so the sentence, she vidis lin hieraŭ wouldn't be true anymore. So there's a little bit of nuance there that you might lose. I was going to the store. Mi iris alla butiko. I went to the store. That's probably okay. So I was going to the store, so I went to the store. It's pretty similar. So that one's probably not too far off. By tomorrow, she will have already won. You could say, morgaŭ ŝi venkos. Tomorrow she will win. Well, what if she's actually going to win because it's a game that's being played tonight? So she's not winning tomorrow, but tomorrow she will have already won, right? So it wouldn't, strictly speaking, be correct to say she wins tomorrow. Tomorrow she already has won. So, and the whole thing says we're looking forward at her winning. Tomorrow she will win. But she will have already won has sort of a looking back tone to it, right? She will win is looking forward. She has already won is looking backwards at the win. So this one is also a little tricky. But surely he would have called if everything was fine. Sed certe setio estus bona li telephonus. But certainly, if everything would be fine, he would telephone. Well, he should have already called, right? The whole point is that he would have called by now, and it hasn't happened. If you just use the simple tense form, it's sort of like, well, if everything were to be all right, he would call, so it could still happen. He was loved by everyone. Well, you could just switch this around and say, Chiwi amus lin. Everyone loved him. If you do it that way, you're probably pretty much fine. That means pretty close to the same thing. If I had been there at the time, I would have been shot. Se mi estus tie etiam, mi estus pafita. Now notice the second clause is still mi estus pafita. It's a passive. There's nothing I can do about it. I have to put it in the passive voice. And unlike he was loved by everyone, I didn't say who did the shooting, so I can't say, if I had been there at the time, Lee Harvey Oswald would have shot me, right? I don't know who's doing the shooting in this case, in this sense. So I have to use passive to say I would have been shot by some unspecified person. So that doesn't help us. And the first clause is weaker, because, mi estus tie etiam, it's close to saying, well, if I were there right now, but you do say yetiam, which means at that time, so that's probably okay. We can't get rid of the passive in the second clause, but we did simplify the first clause. It loses some of the nuance, but it's not too bad. All right. Contracted complex tenses. This is something you will extremely rarely see. If the complex tenses are rare, this is even rarer. You can condense the form of st and the form of the participle into a single word. You take the ending of st and apply it to the participle. So li estos vidantasin would be li vidantos shin. Li estis vidonta shin would be li vidontis shin, right? You've taken the participles vidonta, and then the form of st is estis, so it's li vidontis shin. Li estus vidinta shin, li vidintus shin. He would have seen her. So you can compact those into a single word if you really want to. Now, one Esperanto grammarian says that this is packing too much information in too compact a form, and it just gets confusing, and recommends against it. He does, however, notice that the form with intus, which is the one we would see in our "if I had been there" example, is fairly common, right? If I had been there, se mi estintus tie. So you might see that. You might, as you get better at Esperanto yourself, decide to use that when you're talking about something conditional or hypothetical. But don't sweat this too much. This entire video, all of the complex tense stuff, is definitely more advanced Esperanto. Congratulations on making it this far. For the basic things that you would want in the first place, like, can you help me find a store, and I would like to buy some milk, and things of that sort, you don't really need the complex tenses. But if you want to get really good with Esperanto and be able to express yourself in more nuanced and subtle ways, the way you can in English, you're going to need the complex tenses sooner or later for, more subtle communication. The contracted forms that I just mentioned there at the end, less so. And that's the complex tenses. Congratulations. The next video may well be the last in the series unless we find some other problem points of grammar that we haven't talked about. We're going to glance over the 16 rules of Esperanto and see that we've now covered them all. Dankon pro la spektado.